Well, I'll introduce myself again, Oscar Sosa. I'm very happy to be here. I want to thank Gianpaolo and Becky for inviting me and the rest of the panelists. I'm really excited to take part in this conversation. Was this minutes on? Yeah. Well, I'm going to be talking about my dissertation work. I don't have a book manuscript in contract yet. I want to enter into the debate around critical sustainability to the study of transportation infrastructure in Mexico City. And what I want to be presenting here comes from the field work research that I conducted for my dissertation for about 16 months, mainly between 2012 and 2013 in Mexico City. Since 2006, there's been a series of governance transformations and physical interventions that have been taking place in the city that I'm analyzing as part of an ongoing transportation reform. No? And a central component of this reform is the appearance of movilidad or urban mobility or sustainable mobility, which I will use interchangeably today, as a new way of understanding the role of transportation infrastructure. Movilidad links transportation. To think of movilidad is to think about linking transportation infrastructure with discourses of sustainability and the production of a more inclusive city. Most of these interventions have taken the form of a BRT system, bicycle and pedestrian interventions, a lot of public space, but there's also some contradictions that I'm going to try to flesh out now or perhaps later, which have to do with the fact that these projects and infrastructures are being constructed at the same time that there's been an expansion on toll roads or urban highway networks in the city, all of them conceived by the government as part of this movilidad policy. No? I'm not going to discuss each case a detail because of time constraints, but I want to give you a sense of the scale and location of these projects. Metrobus is one of the largest, the fastest expanding BRT systems in Latin America. It's currently moving about 1 million people a year. It has 5 lines, and it's expected to have between 10 and 15 more lines in the next 5 to 10 years, depending on who you talk to. This BRT, it's important to mention that it's not a system that came to expand the capacity of transportation in terms of routes. It's more a project or a system that is replacing semi-regulated or semi-unregulated low capacity vehicles or microbuses or busetas or however you want to call them, no? Depending on where you are. The other project is Ecobici, which is the local bike share system it's going on its 5th year. It moves around 100,000 users each day. And it's complemented with a small network of bicycle lanes, bicycle parking, and some traffic signaling, and a few retrofitting of the cities to make streets a little bit more safe for cyclists. And another one, it's EcoPark, which is the one that I have down in the corner. It's an electronic parking meter system operated privately. There's about 1,200 of them in 8 specific locations in the city. These are mixed-use areas that in recent years have shifted from being residential to becoming centers of office space and retail space. No, this is a very interesting project. It basically allows companies to buy and operate the system, and the companies will give 30% of the revenue back to the city, and the city uses that money to invest in public space improvements, which have to take place in the same area where the money came, the revenue was collected. No, just to get a sense of where this is in terms of Mexico City, they're basically focused in the central areas, and I'm going to talk about how this signals some interesting dynamics going on. I also want to mention that these are fast-growing systems. This is an expansion on the making. However, they still represent a very small percentage of the money that's spent in urban infrastructure, which is still going mainly to car infrastructure. No? So the The advent of movilidad policy as a concern, as a policy space, I think signals an important shift in the way transportation infrastructure is being understood in Mexico City. It has come to redefine a long-standing problem in Mexico, which is air pollution and traffic congestion. And now these problems are being thought of as issues of sustainability concerning carbon reduction, emissions, and about democracy concerning public space and mass transit. So the meaning, however, the meaning of what sustainable and democratic means remains ambiguous. I'm going to try to flesh out some of these ambiguities, but I think also this will be something that we can talk about later. So these projects are being conceived as being green policies, no? And they're discursively described as such, especially the government and the policy actors are thinking about it in these terms. But the truth, like I mentioned, is that they come to exist in parallel to large investments in car infrastructure and part of other or larger projects. No? So I think it's important to think about these infrastructures, these projects, as parts of reform that yes, they try to address Mexico City's chaotic transportation planning and urban development context, but they're also technologies that give the city government, expansive capacity to deal with political constraints and to manage territory. And this becomes especially evident in two issues. One is in the way that the BRT has allowed the city government to deal with the so-called transportation or bus mafias, which are the great number of semi-independent, semi-regulated small bus operators, owners. BRT as a public-private, but mainly a private enterprise has allowed the city to regain control on the provision of services without having to resort to heavy subsidies or to making a public company, as it did in the past. No? And these technologies are also allowing new ways of dealing with managing territory and space. These infrastructures are tools that help tidy up and rationalize public space. They're embedded in larger efforts to revitalize central areas of the city around very specific corridors, very targeted areas, very profitable markets, to put it more bluntly. So they are the enablers of urban restructuring and of a turn towards the central city after several decades of urban expansion in Mexico. No? Just to give you an example, EcoPark is replacing, I don't know if I have EcoPark, which is the parking system, is replacing informal franeleros, as we call them in Mexico, informal workers that manage space, parking spaces in the city. You give them a small fee and they watch your car and they let you park. Now those are being replaced by a very rational and centralized system, no? That allows for new ways of managing revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And very quickly, because I know I'm going to be short on time, I just want to point to the historical moment in which this focus on transportation comes to exist or comes to be, which has to do with the politics of electoral politics in Mexico City. Mexico City was recently democratized and recently just the last capital in Latin America to become democratic after many years, and projects such as Metrobus and the work that Marcelo Ebrard did after López Obrador to expand this system that started as a climate change experiment funded by the World Bank into a comprehensive green urbanism project called Plan Verde, in which transportation was a central point. It kind of matches it matches the way or the moment that these actors majors start to think of their positions as platforms from which they can contend as presidential candidates. No? So I want to think of these projects as embedded in the largest aspirations, not only of the city as becoming cutting edge and innovative and sustainable, but also of political actors and one national and global recognition. No? And for those of you that follow Mexico news, Marcelo Ebrard in 2010, actually this worked out pretty well for him. He was awarded the Mayor of the Year, and then he became the head of the World Mayors Council on Climate Change. Now, whether this is eventually going to help him become president of the country, it's a different story. No? And Miriam gave us a few pointers, and she wanted us to think about how this infrastructure is connected to different kinds of politics. I think that these infrastructures that I've been discussing signal the entrance of a constellation of actors such as NGOs, international funding organizations, international NGOs, and experts into local policy making. I think particularly important are the NGOs, international NGOs such as Embark and ITDP, who belong to a large global sustainable transportation complex. Some icons might sound familiar or look familiar to you. These organizations broker between international agencies and local institutions and other relevant actors, which can be local activists, politicians, sources of federal funding. They can bring funding from abroad as well. And they're coming into stage has led to the creation of new spaces for political engagement that are increasingly relevant for policy making in Mexico City. I'm talking about forums, conferences, roundtables. I'm also talking about the production of a great deal of information on best practices and how to implement projects that are targeted at educating citizens, but also public officials and decision makers. No? But these actors also play a very interesting role. They play the game of carrots and sticks pretty well. They give awards when governments or the local government does what they want, or they follow their agendas, but they also reprimand them when they don't. And this is just one quick example. ITDP and the Prince of Denmark is given the Mayor Mancera an award for being the best bicycle-friendly city at the Cyclo Cities Award. We can talk about what does these awards mean, which it's very debatable. But what I want to point out is that these experts are taking part in all the stages of infrastructure planning and policy making in the city. You know? They're participating in the agenda setting, in the implementation, and also in the evaluation of programs and of infrastructure. No? Just another issue related to democracy. I think it's important to pay attention to how the focus on transportation has coincided with in other ways in the process of democratization of Mexico City. So there's ideas about the green city, and they have been picked up by the PRD, by the local government, and they have become a central component of the political project. No? And the PRD, the people in the office will tell you, every time we spend money in mass transit or in mobility, we're actually addressing the needs of low-income residents. This example is like the new hierarchy that they have devised, that it's supposedly reflected in the new transportation law in the city, which puts pedestrians at the top and cars at the bottom. No? But sustainable transportation infrastructure has also been conceived as a part of a project of co-governing, which is central to the PRD, and it speaks of its historical ties to the urban social movement. No? So the city posture has always been that in the designing of mobilidad policy, civil society is going to have a central role, and that citizens are going to be very important decision-making actors. No? In practice, however, and this is getting to the interesting point, is that the mobilidad policy has been conceived through a very exclusionary processes through which only a narrow group of civil society actors, namely NGOs and experts, have a real saying, and where citizens' input rarely has a tangible effect on the design of policies or on the implementation of projects. No? One example would be that I didn't bring I'll show a picture later. Is the controversy around the implementation of Eco Park of the parking meter system, which is conceived by the city as the first step into achieving some form of congestion control along the lines of what London has been doing. No? So the citizens were opposing this project, and these were not just any citizens. They were citizens that were lower income residents of neighborhoods like Roma or Condesa that were going to be unequally affected by parking restrictions. No? So these interventions bringing about a redefinition of public space, who are its users and what it means to be a citizen. But it's also part of a larger efforts to improve the face of certain areas of the city. And these are projects that as they are materialized and they become real, they're reinforcing and shifting patterns of inequality. In other words, while discursively they're addressing the needs of the most, in practice they have clear beneficiaries. For example, Ecobici, most of the bicycle infrastructure has been focused in the areas of the city where they have not been focused on the areas of the city where most of the bike trips take place, which are the dark areas in this map, which are parts in the east side of the city, which are low income. Instead, most of the infrastructure has been done around that red-orange circle, which are neighborhoods and districts that are supposed to be cool, where the, Roma, Condesa, Polanco, if you're familiar with Mexico City, you know what I'm talking about. So the expectation is that the public officials and experts are telling me, or told me, the idea here is to make green lifestyle desirable. No? If we make it desirable, if we make the rich adopt this lifestyle, then the rest of the city will follow. On the other hand, if we keep associating people keep associating bicycling with being poor and not being able to afford a car, nobody's going to get on a bicycle ever, no? So by making these kind of decisions, I'm arguing that they're reinforcing certain stereotypes and certain hierarchies and certain inequalities in the city, no? And quickly, I want to move to what I'm thinking about how infrastructure is imagined, and how actors involved in mobilidad are participating in the futuring of the city. And I'm thinking of this as a politics of immediacy. And I'm focusing on pilot programs that work as demonstrations of what is to come in the future, around which resources can be mobilized today. So pilot programs such as the bicycle that I was just describing, or some of the BRT lines. This is, for example, the BRT line that's going to supposedly make Mexico City look like London. Pilot programs are not experiments where technologies are tested. Instead, they are meant to show a version of what the city of the future could look like. They're deployed piecemeal, and they're targeted in areas where they'll have less friction, but also in areas that will bring about the most visibility and make these policies or these infrastructures more desirable. Thus, they're implemented hoping that the rest of the reforms that would eventually sustain a scaling up of these kind of policies will eventually follow. And I think later we can discuss whether the deeper transformation are actually taking place, or we're just looking at some mirages. So I found also that sustainability, it's a very contested term. What it's sustainable for NGOs is not necessarily what activists and citizens have in mind, no? And for the city government, everything can be sustainable and green, no? Which is a very comfortable position. No? But even toll roads can be sustainable, because by building toll roads, you are reducing travel times. That means that you're reducing carbon emissions. That means you are a more green city. No? So you start getting into this slippery slope of what makes sustainability. No? But this ambiguity, it's been very productive. No? If you start from the idea that everything can be green, then you can do a lot of things by painting them green. No? So nevertheless, I think developing sustainable transportation is a very complex problem, and the policy actors that are involved in this are very, very, very aware of these complexities and the political and economic and institutional constraints in which they are operating. No? That's why, and I think this is key and very problematic, is that they choose, or they prefer to work in very piecemeal, small-scale projects. They prefer to skip larger bureaucracies, larger constraints of citywide development plans, and if necessary, they would bypass democratic processes. No, so they'll basically enact or deploy green policies in a very authoritarian fashion. No? Just to finish, these projects have been controversial, and I only have time to mention one. Well, this is the one that I was talking about before. This is neighbors, residents fighting against public parking meters. No, they're evoking Mahatma Gandhi. I think that the joke there is that Mahatma Gandhi would be against parking meters. But these projects are not controversial, no? And I think in cases like these reflect the tensions between this return to the central city and the way in which the government has been managing real estate-led economic development as part of a larger transformation. And they also make evident the tensions between experts and citizens. No? Experts are operating under the assumption that they're impartial, and they oftentimes dismiss opinions of the residents. No? They consider residents selfish and incapable of making good decisions about improvements. And this is just a quick anecdote. In the left side, there's one of the brochures that they made in order to convince the neighbors of the benefits of parking meters, which they basically distributed for free, helping the city to implement this project. On the left, on the right side, you have this thing called the urban beaches that were implemented in the city a few years ago. And I put this picture because one of these transportation experts was telling me from ITDP, actually was telling me, the problem with citizens is that if we ask them about what they want with public space, they're going to come up with something like this, like an urban beach. And I don't have time to give you more context, but the idea here is that I want to convey this the elitism and the dismissiveness of thinking about any of a regular citizen as somebody incapable of coming up with a vision, with an interesting or an intelligent vision of what a sustainable city would look like. No? In sum, just to answer some of the questions that were framing this roundtable, because I think I already went over my time. I would change the question. It's not if does sustainable transportation reinforce inequality. I would like, for the time being, say how is it reinforcing inequality. Well, what I've been finding is that NGOs and experts are closing down. The city government is over relying on them, and they are closing down on alternative ideas of a sustainable city. And when we're thinking about policy and we're acting, we're engaged in this politics of immediacy, and we're thinking that substance is going to follow form. So infrastructures like today look sustainable, like parking, parklets and pocket parks and bicycle infrastructure and parking meters, organized sidewalks, clean sidewalks. They might look more democratic, however they're implemented in a very authoritarian fashion. And we're expecting that just because they actually existed now, they will bring about the necessary changes later on. And I think that's what I had that's what I have as starting points for our discussion. Thank you.